They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Rafal, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
All right, man, I love that intro, particularly when the kids get involved. All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down the security rabbit hole to yet another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raf. I've got you on the mic here. I've got a great episode. It is holiday season upon us, and I've got a great guest for you to talk a little bit through a philosophical topic. Trust in the digital world, and for that I've got Mr. Mike Towers. Mike, how are you?
I'm real good. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm fantastic. It's getting chilly. It's chili cook-off season. It's pumpkin spice everything. So that's how fall's in the air. Boy, it dropped into the low 60s here. It's chilly here.
Well, here in Boston, the low this morning was about 28, so a little colder here. But yeah, winter's definitely coming.
We haven't even had a low like that. Oof, that's not looking forward to that those days. But anyway, well, the weather may be cold, but the podcasting is hot in our 14th season here, folks. If you haven't had a chance, go subscribe to the YouTube channel. Get all these episodes piping hot, and some of them you can watch directly. Check out our LinkedIn page, wherein you get a bunch of announcements and episodes get posted. And of course, subscribe to the podcast on Buzzsprout, DtSR.buzzsprout.com. And there's a supporter function. If you look at the show notes for these shows, for the first time ever, I'm allowing kind of a way to sponsor the show, be a supporter. So if you're interested in that, go check that out. All right, without further ado, let's dive into this. Mike, everything is digital now. I think AI may have just taken over the world, given what happened over at OpenAI with everybody trying to analyze whether the board took over or that's just OpenAI and AI's rebellion. But look, it's a digital world. What does trust mean to you when it comes down to like the modern world we live in?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll start by saying, trust in and of itself, it's not a new concept. Throughout history, trust has been a significant contributor to each and every one of our lives, how we engage, with whom we engage with what or with whom we build relationships, how deeply we invest emotionally, where our loyalties lie. I mean, trust is something that as an emotion has been around, and as a feeling is not new. But I think from a digital perspective, it's evolved and developed into something that's more than just human to human. As our interactions increasingly move online, whether or not you have digital trust is an element that I think is really, really pertinent, and I think is, in essence, the next evolution, if you will, of where a lot of the security and risk management disciplines that we've all been focusing on for quite some time can and will take us.
I'd like to separate these two. Let's take two topics here. The trust we have in human interaction, and then let's talk that through first, and then we'll take the machine part next, because that part I think is going to take a little thinking on my behalf. But let's address the trust you and I and our peers and our families and everybody has or can expect in a more digital world, because I'll give you a couple examples, folks. Just some interactions. My folks are getting older, and they are now getting bombarded, just like everybody else is, on their cell phones with the recent one is like, hey, you've got a package that didn't make it. Click here. The Social Security Administration, the Health Services Company, whoever the hell that is, Medicare, Medicaid, all sorts of things, right? That they may or may not have. banks they don't maybe bank at. And look, they don't know any better. If the device says click here because your bank needs to talk to you, they're looking at it and going, yeah, but it says to click here. Why wouldn't I do that, right? What is the digitization of everything done, you think, to trust between people as a human kind of concept?
Yeah, it's a great question. It is interesting construct and concept. So, I mean, in essence, when you think about the digital or even two entities and whether or not trust is established and built and maintained between them, we think about, for example, any situation where there's some sort of customer engagement or some sort of retention requirement. And it's especially true with products or services where there's a specific and deep level of expertise required. So if you think about, for example, engaging or getting an auto mechanic or a building contractor, you're putting a lot of trust in those individuals because they're doing something that you need from them, or you wouldn't have engaged them because you can do it yourself.
Right.
And I think that as we do more and more digitally, and have done more and more digitally, whether it's booking a hotel room, booking a flight, buying groceries to be delivered, you're putting, or even something as simple as a Slack channel or a Teams channel, you're basically putting a lot of trust in a transaction and in an engagement, in an experience that you probably don't recognize or you understand how it's working behind the scenes. You just expect it to happen. So, will your data be protected? Is your, the experiences that you're undertaking, are they going to be used in some other way? Or
right.
Can you have confidence that, what you're doing through that experience is only for that experience and not some other ulterior motive? So a lot of that comes down to the element of trust that could impact our perspectives. It's a lot. It's trust as an emotion is earned. It's never given. So, and I think from a digital perspective, there is, for whatever reason, and actually Johns Hopkins has done some interesting studies on this over the years, there is a perceived level of trust that occurs from a digital perspective far quicker than, say, it would in most human-to-human interactions. So for whatever reason, a good bit of society earns trust more quickly digitally than they do emotionally from a person perspective. And that, you see that, for example, in the traditional, I'll call it, corporate world or the IT world, where, if you're doing your taxes or if you've got some pictures or other personal data on your computer at home, you have a level of accountability and a personal level of accountability to make sure that's protected. But once you go into the office, you expect someone else to take care of it.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah.
For an inherent trust that you have in the machine, if you will. And for whatever reason, and even like you mentioned before with AI, for whatever reason, there was a lot of, and this is something that I think is unique in the digital world, that if you ask somebody on the street to give you advice on something that maybe it's in their level of expertise, there's a natural skepticism. But for whatever reason, if Google spits it out or OpenAI spits it out, then there's whatever reason, a lot of people give that more credence. So I think that there's definitely an element of, but trust is becoming more and more apparent and more important from a data and digital perspective, just because so many of our day-to-day interactions are becoming dependent on it.
Yeah. So this is the kind of the crux of it, right? You can't. I feel like the world used to be done in person, or at least somebody was calling you. You could figure out who the number is and call them back, and like that technology has abstracted some of that, and so now you really don't know. Well, is this Mike calling me, or is this a fake caller ID? Is this actually Mike's voice, or is it an AI generated thing? Is this my child saying help? I need money. I'm stuck, or is this some deep fake somewhere, right? And so on that front, I feel like trust from a technology perspective, as everything's gone digital, we've eroded the absolute crap out of trust in anything that we do in our physical world. I think it's starting to translate. into the way people interact, right? I mean, it's online trolls can cause riots and bank runs and all kinds of crazy things, as we've seen. Everything from fake news to fake, child abduction and weather warnings to, uh, hijacking accounts of all kinds. Like there's a lot that the ability to transact digitally has done, and not a lot of it has been good.
Right. And I think that depending on the value or the risk, if you will, of what you're trying to do digitally, maybe the expectations of trust are, awry or different or off kilter. So if you're on social media, for example,
Yeah, it's a different beast.
trusting that everything's being said or shared with the appropriate level of veracity or fact checking, probably not. But if you're going to go read, a reputable news site, or if you're going to potentially go to your bank, the accuracy of the data is at a whole different level. So there's inherent levels of trust that people build. And I think the technology and digital veneer, if you will, of certain scenarios that, before, had a different level of trust to it. I mean, think about the Uber experience.
Yeah.
So, or Uber, would we have ever trusted getting in a complete stranger's car? At
Nope.
least if we hailed a cab in New York or San Francisco, we trust that they're professionals because there's a personal brand recognition of a big yellow cab or whatever. It's just an entity that you expect. Same thing for if you get on an airline, you expect the pilot knows what
Right.
they're doing. You're putting a lot in their hands.
Yeah.
If you will. But nowadays, because all of a sudden there's a slick new app with a clever map or whatever that you can book Uber with, then you're inherently trusting to get in a complete stranger's car. So I think that there is an element of the digitization of some of these transactions that adds into it. But I think, again, trust is, there's an intentional choice being made by somebody, whether it's a company or entity, that over time is earning your trust. And in many respects, I'll quote Kevin Plank, the founder and CEO of Under Armour. He said it best. Trust is earned in drips and it's lost in buckets. So how trust gets earned over time, and to maintain that trust is very, very different, I would say, dynamic than restoring trust if it's lost. So that has a different aspect to it on the digital side as well.
And so I want to go back to a point you made, because you said, hey, it's your bank or it's a news site you trust. But here's the part that there's a kind of the crossover between the personal world and the consumer world and the world we live in, right, where it's the enterprise and the business world. My bank the website can be cloned to the point where it is hard to tell that it's a fake. News sites can be cloned. Sometimes you're reading a news article, and I've done this. This has happened to me. In fact, happened to me yesterday. I was looking for something. I clicked on it. It said, hey, honest review of the thing I was searching for. I was like, great. Clicked on it, started reading it, and I was like, wait a minute. This feels like an ad. Scroll to the bottom, no mention that it's an ad. It's like, oh, brought to you by, blah, blah, blah. And like click the about, like, oh, this site has paid placement advertising. Like, really? I wasted that. So it's hard to, at least for me as a consumer now, know exactly what level of, I can place trust in a logo, or like if I physically walk into my bank, I'm pretty certain, or a branch or an ATM, right? I'm pretty certain that that's not like a fake bank somebody put up, right?
Right.
But if I go to a website, I go to a concert page, I go to a celebrity, whatever I'm doing, it's hard to tell. Now, the transition here is, the bridge is that on our side, it's our job to make sure that consumers get back to some level of, that we can give them some level of trust, give them some level of understanding that, yes, it is actually us. It is actually me, Bank of Acme, right? Not a digital version or a digital twin or a copy or an evil malicious. That's proving to be a lot more difficult than we thought, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think the dynamic of trust is obviously becoming far more profound as data, digital, and technology is embedded in all parts and just about every engagement. You think about, you talked about banks or whatever, and most people are using and engaging with their bank digitally than they're ever going to go into a branch. So their face, their experience, their exposure to the bank is all going to be digital. And therefore, it is a proxy of the trustworthiness of that bank. Whereas you think about other industries, like, the one that I'm near and dear to, closest to, is healthcare and life sciences. For the most part, most people will establish trust for a physician based on their knowledge of you, their ability to diagnose, their ability to care for you. How clever or how slick their website is, their digital engagement in the healthcare world is probably not as important factor yet. It may get
Fair
there.
enough. Yeah.
And COVID has exacerbated this and it made it more accelerated. But there are certain industries where your ability to engage digitally and the trustworthiness and the reputation you build digitally is deeply linked to your confidence in that business transaction. I mean, even taking something like, if you think about, I know this goes back a few years, if you think about Target and TJ Maxx, who both had significant cyber breaches, if you look at the way that impacted their stock price and their revenue, it was a blip. It barely, because there was an expectation of, my ability to go into that store and buy a 2x4, if it's a Home Depot, or to buy some clothes at Target or whatever, it's not really going to be impacted by, the trust hasn't eroded to enough that I won't go back to that store. But if my bank, I expect more from them, or there's other industries where the expectation of trust is higher, or God forbid you book a flight and you show up to the airport and that's not legit, that's a whole different level of expectation. So I think that there's as humans, we've calibrated the expectations. And I think as other industries evolve to the point where the data and digital experiences are the top, I would say, proxy and indicator of trust or reputation, that's where I think that I would say the pivot flips, if you will, to where digital trust is really, really important. Because the way I personally think about digital trust and define digital trust is, as soon as how well you do data and digital is directly linked to your reputation as a company, then you must build and maintain digital trust.
Okay, that's fair. And so that puts us into that puts a fence around a couple of specific areas in industry and a couple of market segments. Well, let's stick to your kind of your known health and life sciences area, and something that hit me a while ago that was kind of a big deal. There was several articles over, must have been 2-3 years ago, maybe, of like fake vaccines, right? Or like fake, whatever it was, injectables. And they were talking about using like blockchain to identify, supply chain all the way from manufacturer to delivery to store to you. It is like, for the longest time, blockchain was a solution in search of a problem. Did that stick? Was that something that because we've talked about using that, and collectively we have talked about using that in the food world, right? Where it's like, okay, this tomato came from that farm and I can track it. Like, I can't imagine going to that level as an individual, but it could be done for things like contaminated, salad for the millionth time with salmonella poisoning, right? And E. coli bacteria. Has that, is that I guess what I'm asking is that a place where like the whole blockchain concept actually made a positive impact on digital trust?
Yeah, I think the promise of blockchain can definitely help digital trust, because it does provide and allow more distributed control and distributed ledger capabilities, if you will, there's not just one, ivory tower empire, if you will, that owns and controls everything. So the power of it and the prospect of it, I think, is, now, interestingly enough, depending on your industry and depending on your perspective, like I can tell you, for example, being on the board of the Health ISAC, which is an organization that's committed to improving the industry overall, there are a lot of hospitals that would not buy into blockchain because of the legacy of the technology and where it came from. So, even though it can be immensely powerful for them, there's just reputational linkage, if you will, from a technological origins perspective that could be a challenge. But I think at a macro level, the ability to share and exchange data with more distributed control is really, really important, because I think, again, a lot of this comes down to what society's expectations are. And I think what the